Next up we have Desk Imp, a neutral 0 mana 1/1. This one happens to be a demon. So we got ourselves a new Wisp. And traditionally, most of the Wisp clones actually have seen some amount of play. Wisp has seen play. It was in like, it's been in some rogue decks as like combo activator or for quest rogue. Snow Flipper Penguin saw play in aggro druid because it was a beast. And I think Desk Imp actually could see some play as well. Most notably, Warlock and Priest, I guess, but mostly Warlock got Disciplinary and Gandling. When you play a minion, kill it, and make a 4/4. The more Wisps you have with that, the better. This is also just a very reasonable card with Philosophy. Turn 1, you can Philosophy, copy a Desk Imp, give it +1/+1, and then just play 2 0 mana 2/2s. So your turn 1 is 2 2/2s. That's a very strong turn 1. And I'm sure there's some other stuff that you can do with the Desk Imp as well. You can actually, like, sense demons to draw your Desk Imps, and then curve that into Disciplinary and Gandling. Maybe that's a thing. Probably a meme. But yeah, Desk Imp is certainly a reasonable card, I would say. Next we have Animated Broomstick. 1 mana 1/1 with Rush, and Battlecry, give your other minions Rush. Seems like a pretty solid card. We know that giving other minions Rush is pretty solid because Magic Carpet is a card that has seen a lot of play. Compared to Magic Carpet, this is just 1 turn only. It's not really a continuous threat that the opponent has to deal with, but it does cost 2 less mana. So it's potentially quite powerful. Unlike Magic Carpet though, obviously this is not restricted to 1-cost minions. So maybe you could play this in more of a mid-range deck. Maybe like Highlander Hunter would want to play this card, and then just whenever you can fill it into a curve, it's fine. Like turn 5, you can give your Evasive Feywing Rush or something like that. You could maybe even give like your Dragon Queen Alexstrasza Rush the turn you play her, or give your Rottenness Drake Rush if you happen to miss the thing you want. It's just like an easy card to fit into a curve. I've seen some speculation that you even play it in like Highlander Mage, and use it in the same turn as like Power of Creation or Deep Freeze or whatever. It's pretty reasonable to give those things Rush as well. I'm not sure if it's high impact enough of a card to really see play in a deck like that. And it's pretty situational, so I'm not even sure that it would really see much play in something like Zoo or another aggro deck. But it's definitely a unique card. It's definitely pretty pushed for a 1-drop. So I could definitely see this seeing some amount of play, but I'm not really sure where. Next we have Intrepid Initiate. 1 mana 1/2 spell burst, gain +2 attack. So if you manage to cast a spell with this, it's a neutral flame imp. But I think it's not that easy to spell burst this. Like if you're just playing this on turn 1 and hoping to spell burst it on turn 2, it's going to get value traded a lot by Blazing Battle Mages. So for that reason, I think a lot of times I would rather just play Blazing Battle Mage myself. Probably the best spot for this is in the Gibberling deck that Druid is probably going to be playing. Even in that deck, I think I might rather play Blazing Battle Mage, but maybe you want to play both or something. I don't know, it's like an okay 1-drop, but I think it's a 1/2 more often than it's a 2/2. So I actually am not the biggest fan of this card. Pretty disgusting if you backstab your opponent's turn 1 play, though. Next up, we have Tour Guide. 1 mana 1/1 Battlecry. Your next hero power costs 0. This card actually seems really insane to me the more I think about it. So we've seen some other cards in the past that affect your hero power. Is Waterboy still in Standard? I don't even know because the card is so bad. It doesn't look like it's still in Standard. But compared to those, this is actually overall a discount, because normally your hero power costs 2, you spend 1 on this, so basically, you make your hero power in most classes, you make your hero power cost 1 less mana, and you get a 1/1 out of it. But on top of that, you don't even have to use your hero power this turn. It's just your next hero power. So, like, one of the more disgusting things you can do with this card is you just Tour Guide on turn 1, and then turn 2, you can play Phase Stalker and pull a secret out of your deck. That's really disgusting. You can do something similar with playing and using Dragonbane's effect on curve. But you don't even have to get that ridiculous for this card to just be good. Like, just play this in Rogue, and turn 1 you can play this and make a dagger, and then follow up with a solid 2-drop. Very good. Going back to Hunter, probably shouldn't have left the Hunter yet. But it's a 1-mana 1/1 that deals 2 damage to the opponent's face. Pretty reminiscent of Leper Gnome. Plus it's a good activator to make some more Leper Gnomes with toxic reinforcements. It's comparable to Kobold Librarian if you just play it in Warlock. I think it's maybe at its best in Shaman, because you can go... Basically, it lets you go turn 1 hero power, turn 2 hero power, which is going to significantly up the consistency of your Totemic Reflection. You can play this in Paladin, and in Paladin, this card is basically just... Lost in the Jungle, because it's 1 mana, get 2 1/1s. And Lost in the Jungle was one of the better cards in Odd Paladin, if I remember correctly. So, this is basically just a really open-ended card. You can play it in a lot of classes, and it seems quite strong. Probably one of the better cards in the set, if I had to guess. Mostly an aggro card, most likely. But maybe you can do something really disgusting with like the Shaman quest or something in the late game. Next up we have Manafeeder Panthara, 2-mana 2/3 beast, battlecry. If you've used your hero power this turn, draw a card. So this actually has really good synergy with the Tour Guide we just looked at. But in general, just seems like a pretty okay card. In most classes, it's going to be pretty comparable to Gnomish Inventor. It's going to be 4 mana because you're playing a 2-drop plus your hero power. You get a 2/3 instead of a 2/4. But you do get the effect of the hero power as well, so you still get to like draw a card in Warlock or whatever. But I think this card is undoubtedly at its best in Demon Hunter, because for some reason Demon Hunter's hero power only costs 1 mana. So 3 mana for a 2/3 that draws a card and get your Demon Hunter hero power. Demon Hunter already sometimes plays Vulpera Scoundrel. This just seems better than Vulpera Scoundrel, so Manafeeder Panthara seems like a good card. Good in Demon Hunter, maybe good in Tour Guide decks, maybe potentially good in other decks as well. Next we have Sneaky Delinquent, 2-mana 3/1 stealth, Death Rattle at a 3/1 ghost with stealth to your hand, and that 3/1 ghost also costs 2 mana. So 2-mana 3/1 stealth that adds a 2-mana 3/1 stealth to your hand. So obviously, if you compare this to, say, Spy Mistress, which is a 1-mana 3/1 stealth, it looks kinda bad. But then if you compare it to like Skyvateer, which is a 2-mana 1/3 stealth, it starts to look a little bit better. Draw a card is usually a stronger effect than draw a 2-mana 3/1 stealth, but it kind of depends on the deck you're playing. Like if you're playing a dedicated stealth rogue, particularly if it's fairly aggressive, the 2-mana 3/1 stealth is a pretty good thing to draw into. And it's actually just a lot of damage for one card. It's slow and it costs 4 mana, but this is still 6 damage in one card. That's pretty efficient. Way more efficient damage-wise than Skyvateer. So I think particularly a stealth rogue would actually be pretty interested in playing this. And maybe other classes as well, maybe like Face Hunter could debatably play this card. It's actually a pretty reasonable stealth minion if you want to play like a buff Paladin or a buff Priest. So just generally a strong card, I would say. Even if it's like a little bit mana inefficient per minion, but we know like from Firefly that that's actually just sort of acceptable. Next up we have Voracious Reader, 2-mana 1/3. At the end of your turn, draw until you have 3 cards. So based on first impressions, this is probably my read for best card in the set. It compares to Jeeves, which is a card that, as far as I know, still sees at least some play in Wild. It's a one-sided Jeeves, so you don't have to worry about your opponent drawing cards, and it costs half as much mana for basically the same stats. So this card is absolutely ridiculous. Just any like really aggressive aggro deck, you just dump your hand and keep drawing more cards. If your opponent doesn't deal with it for a turn, it just gets completely out of control. But even if they do deal with it, it's a 2-mana 1/3 that probably drew 3 cards. I think Demon Hunter is likely to play this card. There's the Druid Gibberling deck that 100% plays this card. I think this is the kind of card that really just enables like every class to play an aggro deck because it's so broken. And I don't know, I kind of like that. I like that it's possible to play aggro in every class. I'm not necessarily in love with the power level of the card that's required to make that happen, and it's probably going to be pretty frustrating to play against sometimes. But, you know, I like making more archetypes viable. This card is absolutely disgusting, though. Next we have Wandmaker. 2-mana 2/2, Battlecry, add a 1-cost spell from your class to your hand. Demon Hunter currently plays Cobalt Spellkin. Spellkin adds 2 1-cost spells from your class to your hand. This is only 1, but this is a 2-mana 2/2 instead of a 5-mana 3/5, so a more efficient card overall, I would say. Demon Hunter in particular still has its 1-cost spell slot is still very efficient with Consume Magic, Mana Burn, Twin Slice, Philosophy. I think it got like 2 more 1-cost spells, but they're both good. So Wandmaker is just like a good card in Demon Hunter in particular, but it's probably pretty good in other classes as well. Druid has a lot of playable 1-cost spells. Mage has a lot of playable 1-cost spells. Maybe this is a good generator for like a Cyclone Mage or something. It's also just a good generator to activate spell bursts because you get a cheap spell. And, you know, 1-mana spells are good at activating spell burst. It just seems like a generally good card. Maybe Highlander decks play it. Maybe some aggro decks play it even. Wandmaker's pretty solid, I would say. Next we have Educated Elekk. 3-mana 3/4 beast. Whenever a spell is played, this minion remembers it. Death Rattle, shuffle those spells into your deck. Well, I've played a lot of Hearthstone, and one thing I know is that generally cards that shuffle more cards into your deck tend to not be that good. And when they are good, it's usually because the thing that it's shuffling into your deck is like a prime minion that's too good to be in your deck in the first place, or something degenerate along those lines, Baleful Banker that's specifically drawing into Shrivala or something, or Augmented Elekk that's specifically just putting a bunch of bombs into your opponent's deck to freaking kill them. But generally just like as a value play, shuffling cards into your deck is not good. Now this card is efficiently statted, but it still has to hang around and remember some spells, and then after it's remembered the spells it has to die, and then you have to draw into the spells. So it's just ridiculously slow. I don't think any deck is really interested in this much value. And if it is interested in this much value, you can probably just play like Archivist Elysiana instead. Not nearly as much setup, adds more cards to your deck more consistently. I think the Educated Elekk probably just doesn't have much of a home. Next up is Enchanted Cauldron. 3-mana 1/6 with Spell Burst. Cast a random spell of the same cost. So this is definitely a powerful effect, but it's a really slow card because like you don't want to just play this on turn 4 with a 1-cost spell. You're going to randomly cast like Forked Lightning and not hit anything or something like that, and it's just not high impact enough. But if you're saving this until like turn 7 to play alongside your, I don't know, Overflow or something, then that's like really slow, and then you're still casting something at random, and you might just like Flame Strike an empty board, or maybe you Soul Mirror when it's not particularly good for you to do so. Maybe you just cast like another Overflow or a Sprint along with your Overflow and overdraw a bunch of cards. It's just a bit too unreliable, a bit too slow, and just not high enough of a power level to see play, I think. I do love the artwork though. Reminds me of Pot of Greed and all the related cards in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. Next we have Robes of Protection. 3-mana 2/4, your minions have can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So this is just a really efficient card for some sort of zoo type deck. We've seen like Spellstopper, I think, is probably the most comparable card we've had to this in the past. And that card saw pretty much zero play, right? But the Spellstopper herself could be targeted by spells, and Robes of Protection actually protects itself, as well as just being more efficiently statted than the Spellstopper. So definitely a much better card. It's just a matter of, like, this protects all your minions, but if you have like 7 minions in play, your opponent's answer is most likely going to be AoE anyway, not single target removal. And if you're only protecting like 1 or 2 minions, it's not like super good, but I guess it is still pretty good if you're giving a total of 3 things can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. If you have, I mean, that could be like a pretty hard board for a priest to deal with if they can't target your stuff with Penance or Shadow Madness or whatever. So this seems just like a very solid card that could go in like a zoo deck, or maybe a Demon Hunter, maybe some sort of aggro hunter deck. It just depends a lot on the meta. Depends what your opponents are trying to target your stuff with, because obviously if they're not trying to target your stuff, this is just a 3-mana 2/4, which is pretty bad. Very meta dependent card, but certainly strong enough to see play in the right meta. Next up is Crimson Hothead, 4-mana 3/6 dragon with Spellburst, gain +1 attack and taunt. So as a Spellburst minion, this is pretty efficiently statted to start with, and then when you Spellburst it, it gets even an extra stat and taunt. It's kind of an interesting Spellburst minion, because like for most Spellburst minions, if you just try to let it live for a turn and Spellburst it the next turn, your opponent just kills it. But the payoff of Spellbursting this is taunt, so if your opponent just kills it anyway, it kind of had taunt anyway, which is, you know, kind of cute, I guess. It is also a dragon, which dragon is a relevant keyword. Druid cares about it for Breath of Dreams, Hunter cares about it to activate Rottenness Drake, and other classes have their dragon activators as well. And this is just like a pretty efficient dragon card. Like a lot of dragons are big 8-9 mana idiots. This is a 4-mana idiot. And compared to like Twilight Drake, it's a bit more consistent of an idiot. It's less aggressive of an idiot than Evasive Fellwing, depending on your deck. So if you're playing a deck that specifically cares about dragons, I actually could see this card seeing some play. Maybe even just Highlander Mage plays this card. They play a couple cheap spells, they're getting some more cheap spells in the next set. They want to activate Malygos, they want to activate Dragoncaster, they want to activate Arcane Breath. Seems like a fine card. Next up we have Divine Rager, 4-mana 5/1 elemental with Divine Shield. So the next in the long line of various Rager cards. I don't think this one looks particularly viable if we compare it to, say, Scarlet Crusader. This is 1 extra mana for +2 attack. It doesn't really avoid the flaws of Scarlet Crusader, which is that the front and back half of it just both die to pings. Just not a very good card, I would say. Maybe if, like, that old Druid quest was still in Standard. That card cared about 5 power minions, right? Maybe if Jungle Giants was still around, we could care about Divine Rager. But not in this meta, I would say. Next we have Fishy Flyer, 4-mana 4/3 Murloc with Rush, and Death Rattle at a 4/3 Ghost with Rush to your hand. And I believe the Ghost is also a Murloc. So this card is, like, pretty reasonable. 4-mana deal 4, draw a card. Actually kind of comparable to like Marked Shot, which is a card that saw some play in Hunter at some point. It's also got some Murloc synergies, and like as a Murloc, it's a reasonable card that gives you some value, and value is sometimes, or oftentimes really, something that Murloc decks struggle with. But ultimately, I just don't really know what deck wants to play this. If there's like Murloc Shaman that plays Scargill, this is really sick with Scargill, because you can play both halves of this for 1 mana. But in general, I don't think there are very many non-Murloc decks where this is efficient enough of a card. And even in Murloc decks, this is pretty expensive to actually spend all the mana on. It is 8 mana if you're playing both halves of it. Next we have Lake Thresher, 5 mana 4/6 beast, also damages the minions next to whomever it attacks. Now if you're a Battlegrounds player, you might be getting excited, but we've seen cards like this in Constructed before and they tended not to be very good. I do think this probably has the best stats of these sorts of cards that we've seen. Better than Cave Hydra, which only had 2 power. Better than Foe Reaper, which cost, I think it was 1,000,000 mana for that card. So a reasonably efficiently statted card. Probably the most relevant thing with it is with the Druid/Hunter spell Guardian Animals. So you can cheat this out, give it rush, and then leave your opponent's stuff. I think, like, if this is ever going to see play, it's probably in that deck. It's not the best minion to just play if you're actually spending 5 mana on it and it doesn't have rush. But it's quite good off that spell. And that deck, like, there's the Stranglethorn Tiger that draws 2 cards, and then a massive step down before the next best beast. So you might just have to play like Thresher, and I don't know, it's kind of fine. If there's a lot of stuff that dies to 4 damage, that's probably pretty good. I don't think you're ever playing this in a deck that has to use it honestly, but reasonable in at least one specific deck. Next up we have Ogremancer. 5 mana 3/7, whenever your opponent casts a spell, summon a 2/2 skeleton with taunt. So this card reminds me of Trogzor, the infamously overhyped card back from GVG that ended up seeing no play. But compared to Trogzor, it's definitely more efficiently statted, 5 mana 3/7 versus a 7 mana 6/6. And getting taunts instead of just idiots that can be ignored is pretty significant as well. I'm still not really sure that this card is worth actually putting in a deck though. On its own, it's just a 5 mana 3/7. If you're up against like Highlander Hunter or something, they can pretty easily just not cast a spell, and then you kind of look like an idiot playing a 5 mana 3/7. But even if your opponent is playing spells, like, yeah, it's nice that it summons taunts, but it's still only summoning 2/2s. 2/2s aren't exactly the most difficult thing to deal with. Like, if the spell your opponent's playing is Breath of the Infinite, then the 2/2 that you just summoned just freaking dies, right? So not exactly the most high impact card. Even if you're playing against an aggro deck that plays a lot of spells, like some sort of Lava Burst Shaman, they can just attack you and then Lava Burst you to kill you. So I don't think this card is very exciting. And I don't even know what deck would want to play this. The go-to for it would probably be like Highlander Mage. But I just don't see any card in Highlander Mage that I want to cut for this card. So probably not going to see much play. Next we have Steward of Scrolls. 5 mana 4/4 Elemental. Spell damage +1. Battlecry, discover a spell. So the obvious comparison for this card is Azure Drake, which was so overpowered it had to be Hall of Famed. But not really though. Azure Drake was never really that overpowered. It was just kind of played a lot because there were no good 5-drops. And I think we have better 5-drops now. And on top of that, Dragon is a much more relevant tag than Elemental. Discover a spell is a weaker keyword than draw a card. So I'm not too excited about the Steward of Scrolls. If you wanted an effect like this, we already have Big Ol' Whelp in Standard, and Big Ol' Whelp pretty much exclusively sees play in decks that care about the Dragon tag. So I'm not super excited for the Steward of Scrolls. There is some stuff in this set that cares about the spell damage, but generally you prefer to have spell damage on cheaper cards so that you can combo it with the spells. Next we have the Smug Senior, 6 mana 5/7 Taunt. Death Rattle add a 5/7 Ghost with Taunt to your hand. That Ghost also costs 6. So 2 6 mana 5/7s basically. This is a lot of value and a lot of stats packed into one card. It's 2 taunts, which is, I mean, it's 14 health worth of taunts. That's going to be pretty hard for your aggro opponent to get through over 2 turns. But it's a lot of mana you have to sink into this. It's kind of hard to imagine actually putting this in a deck on purpose. And if you want a 6 mana thing that's going to prevent you from dying, it seems like you probably just play Hearthstone Defender instead. But that is a lot of taunt for 1 card. Maybe some sort of like Highlander Mage type thing would be interested in playing this card. Maybe some other Highlander deck that doesn't have quite as many options as Mage. I think it's probably just not a good enough card though. Next up is Sorcerous Substitute. 6 mana 6/6, Battlecry. If you have spell damage, summon a copy of this. So summon a copy of this, I guess that means it works with hand buff stuff, but generally it's just going to be summon another 6/6. If you can consistently have spell damage, this card is pretty insane. Shaman is probably the easiest way to do this with their Rune Dagger, the weapon that provides you with some spell damage. Mage can play their Studies card that discovers a spell damage minion, and then have like a 0 mana lab partner to enable this. Or of course you can always just have a spell damage minion that survived the previous turn to activate this on turn 6. If you are able to activate this card, it's very, very strong. But it is a 6 mana card that needs an activator. So it's a little bit hard to see this seeing play. And if you activate it like any turn, like every turn past turn 6 where you activate this, the amount of just raw stats really falls off in value a lot. But if Shaman has Rune Dagger in play a lot, then this card looks pretty good, at least in that class. The next card is Keymaster Alabaster, a neutral legendary. 7 mana 6/8. Whenever your opponent draws a card, add a copy to your hand that costs 1. So this is like some slow value idiot. Usually it's pretty hard to play cards like this in decks. The floor on this is that you play it, your opponent draws a card, you get a copy of it, and then they kill it. I don't think 7 mana 6/8 draw 1 card from your opponent's deck at random and make it cost 1 is a very strong effect. And as far as I can recall, there's no like Naturalize or Cold Light Oracle or anything like that left in Standard to really abuse this. So to me it just seems like kind of a big value idiot that's not really going to have much of a home. I think there are better value idiots we can be playing in this meta. But it does do a pretty good job specifically of punishing like an on-curve Rogue Galakron or Warrior Galakron or something like that. But I just can't imagine this ever being a card I want to put in my deck on purpose. And finally, we have the Plagued Protodrake. 8 mana 8/8 dragon, Death Rattle, summon a random 7 cost minion. So it's an 8-drop with a Death Rattle that doesn't immediately do something, which probably makes it pretty unplayable. I mean, it is a lot of stats packed into 1 card, and it does have a dragon tag, which is sometimes relevant, but if you want a dragon enabler, at this point you can just play like Alexstrasza or something, and it's probably going to be better. You can potentially cheat this out with like Duel or Dimensional Ripper, but if you're playing a deck like that, I think you'd definitely rather just play Scrapyard Colossus. It doesn't really matter at that point that it costs 2 more mana. You can also cheat it out with like Anka, but again, Scrapyard Colossus is probably better. Maybe you just need something else on top of the Scrapyard Colossus, but I'm still quite skeptical about this card. Can't really imagine it seeing too much play.